Thank you for joining us for the Global Agriculture Innovation Forum. To provide for the best experience, please close other programs and apps and use Zoom's Q&A feature to pose questions for our panel. We will answer as many questions as time permits during the question and answer period. Note that closed captioning is available for today's event. Check your Zoom features for details. Also, please note that today's event will be recorded for later use. Thank you. We will be starting the program shortly. Hello and welcome to the Global Agriculture Innovation Forum. I'm Gerald Shively, Associate Dean and Director of International Programs in the College of Agriculture at Purdue University, your host for this event. On behalf of the organizing committee, our advisory group, and everyone contributing to this effort, I'd like to welcome you to the forum. I'd also like to thank USDA, especially the Foreign Agricultural Service, for its support. Recently, Purdue University was identified among the top 10 most innovative universities in the United States. It is therefore natural that we should be partnering with USDA to present a year-long series of events on the theme of agricultural innovation. Our goal is to explore the frontier of agricultural innovations with a view to feeding the world sustainably. Each virtual event will feature the presentations of world-renowned experts and thought leaders, as well as numerous side events designed to provide a deeper dive into specific topics of interest and concern. Each event is intended to foster dialogue and to provide opportunities for networking. I encourage you to bookmark the forum website and to check back regularly as new events and speakers are added to our list. The forum is global in scope. Our participants today represent 4 continents, and our audience joins us from more than 50 countries. I'd like to offer a special thanks and welcome to our moderator for today's session, Professor John Dixon, who joins us from the University of Queensland in Australia. John's career as a researcher and policy advisor has included a stint at CIMMYT as Director of Impact Assessment, and many years as a senior advisor at ACR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. He brings tremendous depth and breadth of experience to our virtual stage. I encourage everyone to stay for the live question and answer period that will follow the presentations, and to make use of the chat feature to ask questions. Also note that all presentations will be recorded and made available to registrants, along with links to additional curated materials. We are now almost ready to begin our exploration of the theme, Farms and Farmers of the Future, examining innovations to ensure that farms and farmers everywhere are enabled with the latest technologies to make them connected, efficient, productive, and sustainable. In just a moment, Professor Dixon will be introducing today's speakers. Before that, I'd like to welcome just a couple of additional remarks. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Hey, my name is Robert Bonney, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Senior Advisor on Climate at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. On behalf of USDA, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Global Agriculture Innovation Forum. USDA is pleased to be a sponsor of the forum, and we hope that throughout the next year, you will join future events as part of the forum. I'd like to thank the team at Purdue University for partnering with USDA to host the forum. We'd also like to recognize the advisory group that has volunteered many hours in support of this effort. As we all know, by 2050, the world population is estimated to reach nearly 10 billion people. It will be challenging to sustainably feed the growing population, especially in the face of climate change. President Biden has announced a series of actions to address climate change. The United States has rejoined the Paris Agreement. President's executive order on climate change directs USDA to establish incentives for climate-smart agriculture and forestry practices, to set up a new civilian climate corps, to restore forest health, and to undertake a series of other actions. We're not going to solve tomorrow's challenges with only the technologies available to us today. Research and innovation can provide solutions to enhance the sustainability of farm operations, improve the broader food system, and thereby enable a more secure or food secure world. The United States has a long track record of science-based, data-driven innovation. Together, we can lead and empower science-based and data-driven policy and decision-making, enabling inclusive access to innovation globally. Farmers and ranchers must have access to current and future innovations in order to adapt and be successful. They are critical to the innovation process, and the results can broadly provide producers access to a range of tools to support the next era of sustainable farming. We must not forget the critical role of engagement between public and private sectors in delivering innovations to the marketplace. U.S. farmers and ranchers can lead the way in conserving the environment while growing more food with fewer resources. We hope that the forum brings together all stakeholders, emphasizing recent advances and the benefits of scientific and technological tools, as well as showcasing what technologies and practices are available or about to become available to improve agricultural productivity, supply, distribution, and sustainability. Again, thank you for joining the forum, and we wish Purdue University great success.
Hi, I'm Jim Barnhart, Assistant to the Administrator for USAID's Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, and Deputy Coordinator for Development for Feed the Future, the U.S. government's initiative to end global hunger. It's a pleasure to join you in kicking off this year-long series that will share the latest and best thinking about the role of innovation in agriculture and food security in development. I'm happy to add my voice in thanking Purdue, our colleagues from USDA, and our own USAID colleagues from the Development Lab for standing up this forum. When I looked at the list of session topics for the series, I was struck by how much they map to our efforts in Feed the Future that depend on innovation to advance food security, resilience, and nutrition. I don't think this is an accident. Purdue has been a leader in bridging the space between science and engineering on one side and scaling of actual innovations on the other. This space is absolutely critical for many of our investments. And now, with the new administration's priorities emphasizing COVID recovery, racial equity, and addressing the climate crisis, innovation is more important and arguably more urgent than ever. Our partnership with Purdue in Feed the Future goes back to its beginning, over 10 years ago. Feed the Future links here at Purdue have grown since then, and they truly span the full range of innovations that drive our work, from farm to consumer, and improving lives at every step. In the last several years, President Daniels has led Purdue in hosting major global convenings of ending global hunger and also scaling technologies. These efforts went forward hand in hand with the private sector. Our thinking has moved in the same direction, recognizing that private sector actors and investment are essential to drive innovation and impact at scale. In today's topic, Farms and Farmers of the Future is a great place to keep that conversation going. I would like to leave you all by encouraging you to look for the ways that we can challenge ourselves to be more inclusive and sustainable as we develop and scale innovations. Whether in terms of economic equity, climate resilience, or building back better and greener in the wake of COVID-19, the community gathered here from across the country and around the world is uniquely well qualified to help us see and travel down innovative pathways that reduce hunger. And that's what this forum is ultimately all about, improving lives.
Welcome to the Farms and Farmers of the Future Dialogue, the first event of the Global Agricultural Innovation Forum, which has been organised by the International Program of Purdue University and the United States Department of Agriculture. We are fortunate today in having participants from more than 60 countries, which account for more than half of food production around the world. These participants have knowledge of the amazing agricultural diversity across more than 550 million farms and more than 2.5 billion people who are involved in the production, processing and marketing of crops, livestock, forestry and fishery around the world. My name is John Dixon, and I will be your moderator for this event. First, I would like to extend a big thank you to Jerry Shively, the Director of the International Programs, for his welcome to the overall forum and for his explanation of the purposes or objectives of the forum on the awareness, the promotion, and the establishment of partnerships for agricultural innovation. We also appreciate the welcomes from Robert Bonney from US Department of Agriculture and from Jim Barnhart from the US Agency for International Development, and their support for agricultural innovation and its importance for their agencies. After this event on farms and farmers of the future, there will be 5 more themes organised within this Agricultural Innovation Forum. Those 5 themes are genomics, post-harvest management, information communications and technology, entrepreneurship, including youth, and scaling adoption. Each theme comprises a main stage event which addresses 4 major critical topics, followed by 4 side events which drill into depth in relation to each of those 4 topics. Now, a word or two on innovation itself and farms and farmers. Innovation ecosystems commonly refer to the full creation, sharing, adoption, and ultimately replacement of innovations. Innovation ecosystems co-evolve with farmers and farms. They have driven farm productivity for thousands of years and also in turn respond to the gaps, the needs of farms and farmers themselves. The evolution of farms and farmers depends very much on agricultural innovations, but also on other drivers of change, such as demographics, natural resources and climate, especially these days, knowledge sharing, markets, institutions, and policies. Innovations themselves can be incremental or transformational, and they can be disruptive. And the outcomes from the adoption of innovations can be good or bad. Innovations, of course, to be useful, have to fit into farm systems, be attractive to farm managers and business managers and government, and they must ultimately be adoptable and scalable. It is really interesting to follow the innovation from invention to reaching to farmers, to adoption, and to impact. Therefore, a couple of years ago, Purdue University organised an international scaling conference, which brought together the state of the knowledge on scaling of agricultural innovation. Today, we are fortunate that we have got 4 illustrious speakers to address our topics within the farm and farmers of the future dialogue. The first topic is on enabled farmers with transformative technologies. The second topic is on productive and efficient farmers with illustrations from Asia and the Pacific. The third is on sustainable and climate smart farms and farmers with some surprising scenarios. And the fourth is on farmers and farms informed and connected to services with particular illustrations from Africa. These will address 4 critical challenges of the Anthropocene: identify lessons, sketch scenarios for the future, and explore the co-evolution of innovation ecosystems and farms and farmers of the future. Now, it is my very great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Ms. Beth Beckdahl, Deputy Director General of the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, with responsibilities that include partnerships and UN collaboration and private sector partnerships, as well as oversight of the Committee on Agriculture. This role is a continuation of her contributions to public and private sector in agriculture, which included the Agri Novus Indiana Economic Development Initiative, as well as work within the Indiana State Department of Agriculture and the United States Department of Agriculture. Ms. Beckdahl, we look forward very much to your address on farms and farmers of the future enabled with transformational technologies. And a brief word, please, to participants. Don't forget to enter your questions at the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. Ms. Beckdahl, over to you.
Thank you so much, John. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a real pleasure to be here with you. Actually live instead of, I guess, maybe recorded from the FAO headquarters in Rome. Let me begin by thanking both the U.S. Department of Agriculture and also Purdue University for the opportunity to participate in this Global Agriculture Innovation Forum and this inaugural session on farms and farmers of the future. I will be focusing my remarks on some important considerations to enable these farms, especially smallholder farmers, with transformational technologies. Could you go to the next slide, please? It is always useful to consider the external environment affecting today's farms, especially smallholder farmers around the world. First, let me just say a quick word about population growth. We all know these numbers, more than 7 billion people to feed on the planet today, and the number keeps growing. More people are moving to cities, especially in developing countries, not just the mega cities, but even more importantly, intermediate-sized towns as well. Globalization and localization seem to now be competing forces with one another. With globalization that results from the emergence of global firms, trade liberalization, and technological and economic changes, now generating a bit of a pushback, the emergence of local food systems, whether that's shifting preferences towards organic, towards natural, slow, or ethical foods. There is also pressure on natural resources. I think we can safely say it's a fact that we are running out of good, productive land, soil, water, biodiversity, and our productive capacity is threatened. And climate change adds even further challenges and uncertainties. You can take the slide off for just a minute. Along with these macro and long-term trends, there are other forces at work that can drive transformational changes. Influential business strategies, the engagement of the private sector and other types of organizations in the achievement of food systems developments is one. Natural disasters and transboundary pests and diseases can often harshly affect countries and regions. We know that through the emergence of avian flu, African swine flu, the desert locusts, and other types of challenges. And what we are here to talk about today, the emergence of more and more innovative technologies. Would you put up the next slide, please? Just 1 year ago, before taking my role with FAO in Rome, I was based in the Midwest, in Indiana, the home of Purdue University, and was leading an effort to bring many emerging and cutting-edge technologies to our state, to our farmers, and to our partners there. We often spoke of these transformational technologies as ag tech, or agri-food tech, or even ag biosciences. And we focused on a number of the types of technologies and innovations that you see here on the screen. You can remove the slide. Things like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, drone technologies, gene editing, and other kinds of biotechnology and genetic engineering techniques, robotics, digital agriculture, precision agriculture, use of sensors and new types of information technologies, blockchain, and even functional food and nutraceuticals. Admittedly, though, many of these are such early stage technologies and innovations, even in the developed world, and are still not fully adopted among even the larger, more commercial farms there. So I think one of the questions that we need to discuss today as a part of this forum is the question of, does this mean that transformational technology for farmers of the future need to be disruptive in nature? And how should we think about transformational technologies for smallholder farmers in the developing world? To that end, I think it's very important to indicate that context matters. Please put up the next slide. Context matters when we consider innovation of any kind for farms. So let's consider small scale and smallholder farmers in the developing world. Indeed, technologies are going to move more and more towards digitalization and automation. Small-scale farmers will have the opportunity to leapfrog, in many cases, their use of new technologies. For example, move from hand tools to precision agriculture. But not all farmers will be able to afford these new technologies, which means that services may become the user model. And this has the benefit, actually, of empowering rural entrepreneurs and even youth to embrace these new technologies. Therefore, I think it is critical that we consider all innovations, not all of which are seen globally as high tech, that will bring advancement and profitability to smallholder farmers. These include things like basic and low-cost cultivation systems. These could be protected structures, for example, which may take the form of nurseries, hydroponic systems, with the use of other tools such as drip irrigation, fertigation, or even biological control agents. All of these are needed to overcome the unpredictable rainfall, excessive temperatures, pests and diseases that actually are universal in how they affect production agriculture. But what is not universal yet are the types of tools and innovations that we have to address them. Mechanization is another important area, especially for women engaged in farming. In developing countries, women represent 43% of the agricultural labor force. Basic mechanization, therefore, the most basic of improvements in mechanization, can reduce that work burden, can increase labor productivity, and add value to the ultimate farm product. And in the area of digital agriculture, I think it's important that we think about things as the importance of broadband or digital access, and also a number of new mobile platforms that can support farm businesses, many of which today operate from a mobile phone and depend on seemingly simple, SMS texting for connectivity between buyers and sellers, or importantly, for extension and advisory services. These solutions do not need to be complicated to be impactful. In fact, I would argue the simpler, the better. So again, there is no single innovation that defines a farm of the future. This cannot be a one-size-fits-all conversation. We must consider local context in terms of infrastructure, connectivity, capacity, farming practices, and market dynamics in investment and business decisions in order to offer solutions that are locally applicable, accessible, and affordable. Smallholder farmers also bear the burden of the agri-food system challenges today that I earlier mentioned. And COVID-19 has only served to aggravate this situation even more. So let me talk just for a moment about what more is needed. And I think I've got a final slide on this. I should like to stress here the great potential of innovation and digital technologies in providing effective solutions to the challenges we are facing. However, we need a collective effort and a new form of collaborative partnership in order to leave no one behind, especially those smallholders and producers in remote areas. The combined challenge of rising global hunger and this pandemic reminds us that innovation and the application of science technology have always been and must continue to be the cornerstone, the foundation of agriculture. The imperative of producing more with less in light of diminishing natural resources, particularly water, land, and biodiversity, only underscores that innovation in agriculture has never been more critical. Innovation is a big tent. It occurs on a local scale and can also be developed on a global platform. It can come from more institutional, public or private organizations, but it also comes from entrepreneurs and startups. It comes from within every part of the agri-food system, from seeds and genetics to mechanization, equipment, to bio-based products, to animal health and nutrition, to food ingredients, to technology and data. And as we sometimes, I think, fail to remember, innovation does not always mean that we are inventing something new. Often, we can use existing science, technology, and practices, perhaps even from other sectors or other industry clusters, in a more efficient, effective, and productive way. And more than ever, leveraging our shared innovation, technology, and research assets with private sector, academic, scientific, and other research partners will be necessary. We must also collectively consider new creative approaches to financing and investing in innovation. And we need to support countries in the formulation and implementation of contextualized national policies and strategies on innovation and technology adoption. And finally, it's really important that we all continue to advocate and focus on sustainable development goal aligned outcomes for these transformations. Last year marked FAO's 75th anniversary. We were established in 1945 at a time when the world's farmers were facing a different and extraordinary set of agriculture and food security challenges. I'm confident, though, that with conversations like this and with new and creative partnerships, our collective focus on bold, transformational, but yet adaptable innovation Together, we can navigate the crisis of this century as well. Thanks very much again to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Purdue University for organizing this very important discussion. I look forward to hearing from the other speakers and being a part of the discussion that follows. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bechtel, for a stimulating address on the international settings of agricultural innovation in general and for transformational technologies in particular. Asia is famous for the remarkable growth in agricultural productivity since the Green Revolution 50 years ago. Our next speaker, building on the address of Ms. Bechtel, will draw out lessons for current and future farmers in the most populous region of the world, the Asia and Pacific region. It is my very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rajendra Paroda, who has led a distinguished international career in science and management. His achievements include the leadership as Director General and modernisation of the Indian Agricultural Research System, the establishment and leadership as Executive Secretary of the Asia Pacific Association of Agricultural Research Institutions, APARI, and the founder chairman of the Global Forum of Agricultural Research, which has played a key role in international agricultural research agendas. He has advised many international bodies, including CGIAR, the International Fertilizer Industry, and CABI. Thus, he is the perfect presenter for the second address on farms and farmers of the future, on being productive and efficient. Over to you, Dr. Paroda.
I consider this as a privilege to participate in this international agriculture platform and share some of my views relating to farm and farmers of the future, with a special reference to Asia. As we are all aware, agriculture is an engine of growth as far as Asian countries is concerned. It has been an old practice since last more than 5,000 years. And it is very diversified from country to country. And this is the region where we have also experienced green, white, and blue revolutions. Lately, we are also experiencing rainbow revolution relating to fruits and vegetable crop production. Many of these revolutions had been science-led. They had also contributed to household food security, despite manifold increase in population. The agricultural production has in fact surpassed and ensured not only self-sufficiency, but made many countries capable of exporting several crops and commodities in agriculture. We are presently facing the second generation problems of green revolution, whether it is factor productivity decline, whether it is concern of soil health, water decline, biodiversity elimination, and also with regard to climate change. The region is experiencing also the challenge of two important sustainable development goals, that is the hunger and poverty. And therefore, we need to look at what could be the ways by which we can bring in the changes in our farm and farming practices. We need to reorient our research, agriculture, and development agenda, focusing more on innovations, and also bring in a paradigm shift from that of genetic enhancement relating to varieties and hybrids on which we capitalized in the past, than to go to also the second pillar of sustainability around natural resource management. We have to scale innovations, which are likely to help us in not only improving our production, diversifying agriculture, ensuring secondary and sustainable agriculture, but also to see that we add value to our produce and ensure linking farmers to market. In the process, the challenge is also of involving youth in agriculture, youth including women, and to see how we can have an effective role played by them. While doing so, we have to recognize the importance of three cradles of agriculture for Green Revolution period. The first, the excellent policy support by many countries, including countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh, which have become now self-sufficient in food and also exporting uh, rice to other countries, including India as well, where there is export of agriculture produce to the level of almost 40 billion US dollars per year. But then the concern of economic return to the farmer while the input cost is rising and soil health conditions are deteriorating and availability of water would also be less. So we have to now scale the innovations around natural resource management for sustainable intensification of agriculture and also to see that we improve soil health. We go for the concept of one health, soil health, animal health, plant health, and also human health. And also in the process, see that we are able to have the sustainable agriculture around secondary and specialty agriculture. Youth will not be interested more in traditional agriculture. We shall have to also diversify from cereal-centric approach to that of cereals and legume approach, like that of maize and soybean in the US, which has sustained agricultural production for decades now. And we have to see that whatever nutrients we are using, nitrogen use efficiency is only 30%, which will have to be enhanced. We have to go in for micro irrigation approach. We have to also think in the context of conservation agriculture by going in for minimum tillage or zero tillage approach, which has proved very successful in many parts of the world, especially in Latin America, US, Canada, and Australia. And at the same time, we have also to see that we don't let agriculture produce wasted because of lack of infrastructure and marketing opportunities. The region has done well in all directions, whether it is animal production, whether it is fish production, and there is great potential in terms of exploiting the rich agrobiodiversity which is available, and there is great potential also for ensuring better adaptation to climate change and to adopt climate smart agriculture. In this whole process, we also see that there will be a need for reorienting research agenda from commodity and crop approach to that of farming systems approach, depending largely again on animal sector, which is contributing in many cases to at least 20 to almost to 35% of agricultural GDP. We will have to spend more on agriculture research for development, and emphasis must now go not only for only research for research sake, but research for innovation and scaling those innovations which can make a difference, which can ensure more income to the farmers. Smallholder farmers will have to uh, align themselves around farmer producer organizations or go in for contract farming or for self-help groups by which they can link themselves better to the market. We will have to involve youth to provide better advisory services as a paid extension, and also in the process see that we have inputs available to the farmers on time, inputs of the kind which can cut cost for the farmers, such as biofertilizers, biopesticides, micro irrigation, fertigation, and even to go in for diversified production like raising of mushroom, vegetables, medicinal plants, flowers, and so on. And in the whole process, there are tremendous opportunities which need to be harnessed. And for that, we would require at least a minimum 1% of agriculture GDP to be made available through policy support in all countries, as it is happening in many developed nations, so that returns on agriculture research, which are anywhere between 10 to 15 times uh, against the investments made, would help us in ensuring secure and sustainable agriculture. In the whole process, uh, we see that farms in future will have to be not small, but maybe reorganized through better land laws and policies, and through support for farmer producer organizations and better credit to the farmers, and also providing them needed support for diversification, and linking the farmers to the market, and ensuring a better partnership with the private sector, so that the benefit is not only to the farmers alone, but also to the consumers and to the nations, mainly depending on agriculture in the Asian countries. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Paroda, for an insightful address on the revolutions in Asian agriculture, from green to white to blue, and now to the horticultural revolution of rainbow. Also for the future need for innovations, especially on natural resource management and digital ag, and for substantial investment, at least 1% of GDP, in agricultural research and innovation, accompanied by appropriate policy support. While none of us has a crystal ball to foretell the future, our next speaker on sustainable and climate smart futures shares some surprising scenarios on future development of agriculture. Thus, it is my very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Dennis Garrity, who is well known in agricultural and environmental circles internationally. He's currently Drylands Ambassador for the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. He's Senior Fellow at the World Resources Institute, Distinguished Senior Research Fellow at the World Agroforestry Center, and Chair of the Global Partnership to Create an Evergreen Agriculture. Dr. Garrity will now address us on farms and farmers of the future, sustainable and climate smart. And participants, please do remember to enter your questions at the Q&A button. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and hello, everybody. I'm honored to have the chance to speak to you today about farms and farmers of the future, and about the great agricultural transformation that is unfolding in the years directly ahead of us. Agriculture is entering into a period of enormous changes. There are three major drivers that will be forcing these changes, and I'd like to highlight each of the drivers and point out how they, in turn, will incite a wide range of important agricultural innovations. The first of these drivers is a trend that is still very little recognized or appreciated. but one that will have an enormous impact on the future of agriculture. It is quite simply that global population growth is currently slowing down dramatically, and it will actually peak just a couple of decades from now in the 2040s, and then it will begin to continuously decline from there on through the end of the 21st century. This is due to the very rapid pace at which the birth rate is declining everywhere around the world. And the conventional wisdom that remains that population is still growing rapidly and that food production must race to keep up is simply no longer true. The global population will stop growing. Fertility rates are declining rapidly everywhere on Earth. And to give you a couple of examples of major drivers of that process is China's population and India. China's population will max out around 2030 and then begin to decline. India is already reaching near replacement fertility of 2.1 and will be leveling off in population in a couple of decades as well. Thus, actually, soon it will be the case that there is no additional mouths to feed, no more food population race that we've been engaged in for the past 50 years. This is a huge and historic change. The second driver is a major change in food consumption habits. Nutrition and health will become the paramount objectives for food consumers in the near future, and the current millennial generation is leading the way. They are demanding healthier and much more diverse foods than their parents. Per capita meat production will greatly decline, and meat consumed will become increasingly grass-fed through consumer demand. And the demand for food grains to feed ruminant livestock, consequently, will be declining. The third major driver of this great transformation is climate change. As we all know, it will impact very heavily upon agriculture. Farming must adapt to greater frequency and durations and intensity of droughts and storms. Agriculture will experience enormous new pressures to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions and come in line with other industries who are committing to the race to zero. And climate-smart agricultural practices must be a basis to both adapt and to reduce emissions. So how will agriculture respond to the drivers of the great transformation? These three important changes that are going to affect the future of the industry. Well, I believe that these three drivers open up a tremendous window of opportunity to transition to a new agriculture where production is based on agroecological principles, emphasizing soil health and soil carbon. And in the United States, a typical climate-smart practice that is gaining ground rapidly is cover cropping over the cool season of the year. And this is going to spread very rapidly and should dominate American agriculture in the coming decades. Agricultural subsidies are also going to shift strongly towards support for more agroecological production systems that enhance soil quality, water quality, animal welfare, and biodiversity protection. These are going to be very important issues for the consumer, and as a result, will cause agricultural subsidies to shift from commodity orientation to agroecological production. There will be a great acceleration in innovations to move agriculture in this new direction and to take it towards a future where ecological principles will be more and more the basis around which production systems are developed. Another accelerating trend is the perennialization of agriculture. Tree crop enterprises are more resilient to climate change, particularly droughts and higher temperatures that make annual crops more risky. And there will be larger components of trees and shrubs in farming systems, moving away from basic calorie generating annual crops to that diversity of crops in the diet that I mentioned. Fruits and nuts and other types of tree crops will enable farmers to meet the demand for greater product diversity with greater adaptation and greater carbon accumulation as well. We're going to be seeing much more differentiation in farming systems as we look towards future decades. The Evergreening Alliance, which I chair, is actually devoting a large part of its mission to the transformation of agriculture. 4 of the 6 target areas of the Evergreening the Earth campaign that we are spearheading are focused on innovations to transform agriculture. So in conclusion, agriculture must be prepared to innovate rapidly and pretty drastically to address the 3 huge drivers of change that are coming at us right now and that will be accelerating in the coming years. These changes should be good for the future health of consumers, and they should be very good for the global environment. Let's hope that agriculture will embrace these changes, these trends in this transformation, and that the innovations will be there to make the great transition possible. Thank you.
Dr. Garrity, that was quite an eye-opener and underlines the importance of understanding the big drivers of big farming and food system change, and understanding the roles of slowing population growth, the global climate emergency, calling for new innovations to generate sustainable win-win adaptation and mitigation solutions. Of course, this begs the question of where to start now with the provision of agricultural innovations and services to farmers, particularly those who might be lagging well behind their potential, such as in Africa. In this connection, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Louise Fox, non-resident senior fellow in the Africa Growth Initiative at Brookings, who has had a rich international career in labour policy and economic development in the World Bank, USAID, and now Brookings. With her long experience, she is superbly placed to address us on informed and connected farms and farmers of the future. Over to you, Dr. Fox.
Good morning. My name is Louise Fox, and I'm pleased to speak with you today about farmers of the future and innovation, in particular, the importance of having informed farmers of the future. I've been thinking a lot about this in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, which is where I've done most of my work in the last 10 years. Just for information, I'm a labor economist, so I mostly think about earnings from employment, including farmers' earnings from working on the farm, producing agricultural production. Now, I know I'm preaching to the converted when I mention the importance of productivity-led growth in agriculture to future economic development in Africa. But I would say that governments in low-income countries and lower middle-income countries in Africa still do not fully appreciate this point. And I would say, arguably, it has never been more important. Before COVID-19 struck, African economies were growing rapidly, and this economic growth was undergirded by strong agricultural sector growth. You can see this easily if you look at the statistics. I worked with Tom Jane from MSU to produce a paper for USAID that showed this. The important point is that this balanced economic growth translated into significant poverty reduction and started the growth of a middle class in low and lower middle income countries. So with their additional income, the population, even in low-income countries, has been demanding higher value food products. They want more meat and dairy. They want fish, including from aquaculture. They want oil from oil seeds. They want more fresh vegetables and fruit. They want more milled grains, especially wheat and rice, because these are faster to prepare than traditional starches. Currently, a large share of these products are imported, but they could be grown and processed in Africa. And Africa, while it does sell a substantial amount of agricultural production to the rest of the world, it could sell even more given current land abundance relative to other regions. So, why is the role of agricultural development in the transformation to a post-agrarian economy not well understood by the public, including in government? Why do they constantly neglect the potential of the sector for dealing with their youth employment issues, both on the farm and indirectly through upstream and downstream linkages? Well, I encourage you to discuss at the conference how to change this thinking and what role you can play. I don't have the answers to that question, but I think we need to try to find them. Now, the next point is, if this thinking were changed, what should governments do differently? Where should governments invest? Now, one big issue in Africa is a lack of national and location-specific agricultural research and development. Spending is currently too low. My co-authors wrote a lot about this in our recent report that we did for USAID. And Daniel Resnick from IFPRI has also written a lot about the political economy of this spending, why it is often an orphan, and how to protect these expenditures in the national budget. This is clearly an area where we need to do more hard thinking, because the farmers have to have something to be informed about. Now, a second big question is how to get that information to the farmers so that farmers of the future are informed and connected, which they need to be. As you know, farmers need to know about new varieties, as well as about seasonal events and how that affects planting and fertilizing, and also about post-harvest issues, such as new storage technology to reduce loss and toxins, and also about prices, where to sell and the best prices. Timely and reliable information on these topics, especially about changing weather patterns and how to adapt to them, would go a long way in helping these farmers. Now, already mobile phones are making a big difference on this issue, but mobile phone ownership is 25 to 50% lower in rural areas than in urban areas, depending on the country. The gap in a country like Kenya is not very high, but the gap in some countries in West Africa is very high. And it's especially high among women. And of course, internet use is much lower in rural areas than urban areas. And this is a concern. But I was encouraged by a recent OECD report on the digital economy and jobs in Africa, which highlighted the role agritech can play in raising productivity in agriculture. You probably all know a number of stories about some of the really interesting and fast-growing startups in Africa doing agritech. So I won't go into that now. But the important point is the report stressed that much of agritech doesn't need high levels of connectivity. High-speed mobile internet is not so important. Mobile internet at less than 4G will be okay for much of the agritech that's being developed. And that's really encouraging. So what that means is we need to encourage governments to bridge the digital divide in terms of urban, rural, and men and women. And there are low-cost ways. Governments just have to do it. Now, what I'm saying to you is that this should be part of an agricultural development program. So agricultural development is not just about agronomy anymore. It's also about IT engineering as well. And we have to work that way as we're working in the agricultural sector to improve productivity. Second, the use of new technology of GPS and remote sensing and AI, this is already in use, and it can really help to get better real-time information on soils, weather, et cetera, to farmers. Richer countries already do this, as you well know. This may not be news to you, but Ethiopia, a poor country in sub-Saharan Africa, but one which has understood for a number of years that agricultural development undergirds its whole economic strategy, has now used remote sensing soil mapping and provided that information to farmers. It got a major yield increase. In some areas, it was up to 65% improvement. Now, of course, climate change is going to make this sort of activity even more important. But even before we suffer all of the major impacts of climate change, a 65% yield improvement would be great. Now, just one more point about getting more informed farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. There is a key missing link, and Michael Kramer, a Nobel Prize winning economist who you may have heard of, is really talking a lot about this these days and working on it. And I think it's exciting that this issue of getting more informed farmers has attracted an economist of Michael Kramer's stature. So Michael argues that the public sector has the information, but does a mediocre job of disseminating it. The private sector, of course, is much better at disseminating it because it uses all the latest technology and behavioral tricks and this and that, and it checks to make sure the farmers retain it and understand it. But it wants to make money. So if it does the dissemination, it won't reach enough people. Now, in Africa, aid funding is helping to bridge the gap, but much more needs to be done. Michael thinks the answer is public-private partnerships between ministries of agriculture and local disseminators. Now, these local disseminators are often young people who are tech savvy and interested in startups and who know how to do this A/B testing on messages and figure out how to reach their target population. Now, this, of course, using a private provider to disseminate information is also more common in richer country and more developed settings. But I think we have to help sub-Saharan Africa ministries of agriculture understand why this is so important and to learn to operate in this way. So those are the thoughts I wanted to share with you on getting the farmers of the future to be more informed and connected. Thank you again for letting me share my thoughts from my study here in San Francisco, and I wish you a good conference.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. I really appreciated the depth of your analysis of food systems, of labour and family farming in Africa. This was a superb bookend to our 4 presentations on transformational technologies, on productivity and efficiency, on sustainable and climate smart farmers, and information and connectivity for family farmers. This brings us now to the Q&A session of 30 minutes in which your questions will be put to our speakers. The very first question we have actually is for Dr. Paroda and goes as follows. In the next 20 years, do you expect family farmers to become more diversified or more specialised? And what are the implications for their livelihoods and for the sustainability of their agroecologies? What needs to change in the innovation ecosystem for this to occur? Please, Dr. Paroda.
In the next 2 decades, I do see significant shift towards diversified agriculture and also specialized agriculture. In this context, farmers will have to address the concerns of productivity, profitability, and permanency. For productivity, they will have to adopt innovations around genetically modified crops, whether corn or soybean and canola, and also have higher dependence on genome edited crops for better resistance to diseases and pests, and also for abiotic stresses. For profitability, they will have to make shift towards low volume, high value crops, such as seed spices, medicinal plants, even some specialized vegetables and flowers, etc. And also go for value addition. And in the area of permanency, farmers will have to think of regenerative agriculture involving conservation agriculture practices for sustainable intensification, going for organic farming, uh, dependence on less of inorganic fertilizer, but biofertilizer use, and in the process also going for biopesticide use, etc. And also think in the area of increasing productivity through vertical agriculture, protected cultivation, and approaches like use of artificial intelligence, uh, robots for spraying of pesticides, etc. In the whole process, I do see a very important role of youth to be as advisory agents and also input providers, as well as entrepreneurs to link farmers to market more effectively.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Paroda. That was a really great response to questions of diversification, and it led us into a subject matter area that's of very great interest to many of the participants on this call, and it specifically relates to youth in agriculture. We talk about it very much. We've talked for years about it. I'd now like to ask Miss Beth Bechtold, and after her Dr. Dennis Garrity, for their opinions about what the best ways forward are in relation to greater engagement of youth in agriculture, or perhaps even more broadly in the whole rural sector. Over to you, Beth Bechtold, please.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the question. I saw the issue of youth come up in a number of different comments, and I think, John, you're correct. It's a topic that in many ways we've been talking about for generations. Every generation seems to have an aging farmer and a youth problem. And I would just say, and please know that this is a very non-scientific, non-technical response to this question. And I'm probably going to oversimplify, but I think agriculture and farming have a marketing problem. We're not considered cool. And we aren't marketing ourselves to the generation that we're trying to attract. We aren't changing our messaging tools. We aren't changing the branding. We aren't changing the way that we describe the opportunities. And I think more than ever, the social value, the social contribution that agriculture and careers of any kind, whether it's directly in farming or it's in any other part of the food system, this next generation, Gen Z as we call it, this high school age generation of young people, more than any want to make a difference in the world. And we have an opportunity to market farming and agriculture, whether it's in Africa or it's in the state of Indiana in the United States. We have an opportunity to talk about agriculture and farming as being tech-driven, future-oriented, exciting, and an opportunity to do all kinds of things with innovations, all of what we've talked about here today. But we also have an opportunity to tell a story of contributing to something that's greater than any one person. So I would be, I think, a firm advocate with all different types of partners to make sure that we think about our word choice, we think about our branding, we think about our messaging, we really think about how we attract more young people and bring their interest into agriculture through a different kind of communication.
Well, thank you very much. That's great. That's certainly it's the challenge, as you said, that we've been with for generations. As we turn, Dennis, I wonder if you could expand a little bit your reply, not just in relation to youth, but also think particularly about young women and other marginalized groups. How do we bring them into vibrant ag and rural development?
Well, thank you, John. And I'm reflecting on the fact that in the developing countries, youth often have a very difficult time in getting engaged in agriculture because of the land tenure and family tenure situation, and they struggle to establish farming businesses. And I think that we're going to see more youth engaging in small scale, very specialized type of farming activities. Certainly, that's something we've seen here in Kenya very frequently, is the development of specialized types of farming activities that appeal to particular markets for high value crops. And since urbanization is occurring very rapidly in the developing countries, these markets for diversified crops, as several of us have talked about, are expanding very rapidly and are a major reason behind the fast development of diversified systems with vegetable crops, tree crops, etc. And I think that the youth opportunities in those areas of specializing in the kind of crops that are high value, that require less land area, which youth tend not to be access to, is a key to the young people getting involved in agriculture. And that's the sort of trend that we've been observing in Kenya and other countries. And I think that goes for women as well as men. And in many types of farming systems now, the youth are getting involved in the aggregation and the processing and marketing of these diversified crop and vegetable systems, tree crop specialized products as well. So it's the specialized production systems, and it's the processing and marketing of crops, and in this domain of the diversification that is occurring to meet the urban needs of growing urban populations. Thanks, John.
And thanks very much, Dennis. I would imagine there's many opportunities for women, and there's many things women can contribute to specifically in rural areas, rural processing, rural startups, and so on. But let me just step up from the local level a little bit and to ask to Miss Beth Bechtel that we have the experience that for many years, countries have subsidized agricultural inputs as a pathway through to modernization, fertilizers, pesticides. And this has actually yielded terrific increases in food production, which has removed or reduced famines. However, we're now calling for a shift towards more agroecological principles. And that will be central, for example, to CGIAR. So how, and Dennis Garrity mentioned cover crops, for example. So how do we actually shift towards incentives for farmers to adopt more agroecological principles, and what policies may be needed? Over to you, Beth.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, one, again, that is always a challenge is you think about the complexity of national policies to support food and agriculture that really oftentimes are conflicting with one another and aren't always well harmonized. It makes a real challenge in today's environment when we are trying to talk more and more about food systems. Interestingly, just before I came to this session, I was with our colleagues in the European Union talking about their new Green Deal and their farm to fork strategy. And there is a policy that is outlined to really be structured around this concept of a food system that brings a variety of sustainability factors, economic, social, and environmental, all into a national policy environment, which I think is a really, again, fascinating comprehensive approach to designing the kinds of policies, John, again, focused on whether it's agroecological or nutritious foods or some other, sort of approach to protecting the food system. Food loss and waste, I saw, has been talked about, not to lose sight of that as an innovation in policy or a social driven innovation, as opposed to some of what we're talking about here as technological innovations. It's going to be a very interesting year this year for many of us who are connected to food and agriculture, as the United Nations is hosting the Food System Summit later in September. I am very hopeful that as an outcome of that summit, that we'll see a change perhaps in some of discussions and dialogues between and among countries and with other stakeholders to take this more food systems approach to policy. But you're right, many policies remain grounded in sort of decades old approaches to their support for farmers. The United States, not to say the least. And I hope that we'll also see more innovation support, more support for technological and innovations that can come, as we've talked about today. But that's where, for us, one aspect of the work that FAO does, and I'll close on this, is really spending quite a bit of time with parliamentarians. That's a very important part of our partnership outreach. We often talk about private sector, national governments and ministers, but at the end of the day, I think many of us know that it's in parliaments, it's in Congress, it's in these diets, it's in these other parts of the national government system where you have to change the laws, change regulations. And so having that kind of exposure to them is also very important. It's a great point and a very important topic that needs to be incorporated into these discussions.
Thank you, Beth. There's a question for Dennis Garrity from our participants as well. And this is concerning the trend towards perennialization. And the question specifically is that based on a general analysis of a global scenario, or is it based on specific geographic and farming systems contexts? And if so, which will probably lead in this process of perennialization? Over to you, Dennis.
Thanks, John. The process that I was really referring to in terms of perennialization has both broader global aspects as well as particularly contextual aspects in certain farming systems. Obviously, the trend toward perennialization will be much more evident in the tropical countries where you have a year-round favorable solar radiation and temperature for trees, shrubs, and other perennials to grow year-round. So perennialization has been most prominent in the developing countries. But there's a global aspect as well. That is that we're seeing increases in tree density in agricultural lands quite rapidly increase in countries throughout the world. And decadal analysis has been showing quite rapid increases in new tree cultivation in agricultural areas in countries like Brazil, where there was a 14% increase in tree density in agriculture over the past 10 years. And this is mainly in the southern parts of the country where farm sizes are smaller to mid-size versus the Amazonian type of farming, which is very large scale. So it does depend on where you are in the world, but the demand for various kinds of products from trees is increasing. Everybody's familiar with the rising demand for cocoa, chocolate, that has been booming all around the world. Many other tree crops, fruits, nuts, etc. Demand is increasing because of that urbanization, higher incomes, desire for more diverse diets, and that is driving a lot of the process of perennialization in the tropical countries. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks, Dennis. Let me pass to the third group of questions and our last group that's come in from participants. They're essentially about where should we expect these transformational innovations to come from? Will they be from national governments? Will they be from international orgs? Will they be from NGOs? We talk from private sector. So will they be primarily from private sector? Or is there some particular way in which we should move to smart partnerships, as Beth referred to in her presentation? And if so, what would they be? And we realize this will be the last question, so then we'll move to closing after this. So over to you first, Ms. Beth Bechtel, for this, and then second to Dennis.
Thanks, John. And the way I think you framed that question, I think I can just say yes. It needs to come from all of those sources. But you made the right point at the end, which is that there now finally needs to be, I think, more collaboration and more alignment among these different stakeholders and different constituencies than we've seen before. I remember as a young graduate student there at Purdue University, looking very early in my career at these trends between public and private investment in agricultural research, and when the inflection point came back in the, I think, 80s perhaps, for the United States, of when all of a sudden the private sector overtook public institutions as being our country's primary source of agricultural research expenditures. And it was very telling to me at the time that it was an us versus them approach or mindset, a culture almost. And I think today's environment, back to this conversation about food systems, about this, multicultural interlinkage approach that innovation and technology brings to us. I'm incredibly excited here in our organization to be thinking about small and medium-sized enterprises, MSMEs as we call them, looking for the kinds of opportunities. I saw some very sort of pointed conversations in the chat about, not maybe necessarily having national expertise in Africa be a part of the conversation. And for us, as we think about private sector engagement in parts of Africa, more than anything, we need to make sure that we're partnering with the thought leaders, the businesses, the entrepreneurs, and the experts who are based there. I think in the past, though, there used to be this big companies, global multinationals sort of served as kind of the cutting edge. And now today, I think that's shifting. And I think you're recognizing that, there's layers of organizational challenges that sometimes come from them. And you need that nimbleness and that agility today to partner, to finance, to invest, to find the right solution that fits the right problem. And I think there's, much more opportunity for a variety of stakeholders, and be in the private sector at least, a much smaller scale of company, whether again, that be a startup or an entrepreneur or an early stage company that can make a much bigger contribution than they could have in the past. So yes, it takes all of us, I think, to contribute to finding these transformational technologies.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Beth Bechtel. That's wonderful contributions, both from your presentation and the answers. Let me pass this one now over to Dennis. And Dennis, could you extend a bit more your thinking in relation to how private sector NGOs and farmers might fit together in relation to innovation? And I suspect that there's a chance Raj Paroda might like to add to this. So over to you, Dennis.
Thanks, John. I think that there is a distinction on where the innovations will come from, depending on the type of innovations. Certainly, the high-tech solutions will obviously come from the research institutions, both in the public and private sectors. And that's given the fact that you need tremendous investment in the expertise to produce those kinds of innovations. But what's quite interesting is that as we shift more towards agroecological systems, that much of the innovation on these kind of agroecological systems developments will be and is coming from the experiential innovations in farming systems that are derived from the on-the-ground experience that farmers, farmer organizations, and the NGO sector are providing. So it depends on the type of innovation that one is dealing with, the high-tech innovations versus the systems development innovations. And I think both will be, of course, extremely important as we go forward, and they will come predominantly from these different directions as we learn how to adapt our systems to climate change and to these other major drivers of diversification that we're experiencing around the world.
Well, thank you very much. That's excellent, Dennis. And I think now we can move to our closing. We first would like to appreciate all these profound messages on agricultural innovation from the global thought leaders in agricultural research and development. We've had 4 diverse sets of really comprehensive presentations on 4 contrasting areas. These were well grounded in different regions and have been very well presented, for which we are really appreciative. There's a number of takeaways. We can imagine that, as Jim Barnhart from USAID said, we must build back better and greener post-pandemic. And we know that innovation underpins sustainable ag development from Robert Bonney, and that there's a massive wave of innovations coming on genomics, post-harvest management, digital ag, entrepreneurship, and these are coming in future sessions of the forum. We need coordinated public-private action, and as Jim Barnard said, and we also have multiple transformational and multiple impacts that are required, leading towards the SDGs with smart partnerships, as Ms. Beth Beckdahl stressed. We really appreciate the paradigm shifts that are essential as we move forward. Dr. Raj Paroda mentioned NRM pillars, which must be added to the traditional focus on genetics. We also need, he said, to move from crops to diversified farming systems. Also investments in scaling are critical. And Dennis Garrity also referred to the paradigm shifts that are desperately needed. So we know that ag is moving into a turbulent era, as Dennis Garrity said, the great transformation, and Louise Fox painted some of those elements in relation to Africa, and also the huge gap between existing and potential. Therefore, it's not all about new innovation, but also about applying existing innovation more effectively. And that'll be done in the context of an enormous amount of revolutions in ag, green, white, blue, rainbow, etc. There's a few areas that have received a bit less attention, and we'll come to that in future sessions for sure. One of them is the adoption and scaling processes and the innovations required in that space. We also realize that the innovation complexes to solve wicked, uncertain systems problems for which there are no simple solutions is an area that's a huge challenge for us to bring together innovations, to coordinate, to put them into system complexes, and to apply them as such. Wicked problems are such as climate change or the inclusion of marginalized and poor people into the rural development processes. So we are therefore drawing to a close. It's my opportunity to mention, first of all, a huge thanks to our presenters. They've done an excellent job in kicking off this first event of the Global Agricultural Innovation Forum. We'd like to thank all the participants for listening in and also for their questions, which have been very, very good. And we've had some answers to clusters of those questions from our speakers. I'd also like to remind all people on the call that on the 12th of March, we'll be moving on to the next event, which is one of the 4 side events following Farms and Farmers of the Future. Now, this side event is titled Enabling Farms and Farmers to be Productive and Efficient in Producing Wholesome Products. And the moderator will be Dr. Ismahane Eloafi, Chief Scientist, FAO. So just to remind you, that's March 12, same time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, USA. And that will be just one of many events over the next many months in this Global Agricultural Innovation Forum, which will be an ongoing conversation. So thank you very much. It's been a wonderful kickoff event. Thank you and enjoy and stay safe.